Okay, so welcome everyone. Here in Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are all living and that we meet today. I want to pay my respects to their culture and their elders, past, present and emerging. At Discovery College, we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that they remain strong in their connection, their enduring connection to land and culture. So hello, I'm Claire. A little bit about me is I am white Anglo-Saxon Australian. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a recovering teacher, and so my background is education. I've got lived experience in my own mental health journey, and I've supported and known and cared for lots of people who struggled through theirs. And I work for Discovery College. So Discovery College is an educational mental health program, and normally we run courses in Southeast Melbourne for professionals, for young people, family, friends, basically anyone who wants to learn about an idea in mental health. And something a little bit different about what we do is that we don't necessarily think there's a right way of thinking in mental health, and so we like to pull on different people's experiences, professional views, different cultural or spiritual angles around an idea, and maybe take some of those things that we learn to put in our toolkits to support ourselves or even to support others. So a way we've tried to do that right now is Discovery Convos. The topic we're looking at is self-care, and so we're having weekly chats with lots of different awesome perspectives around the idea of self-care. So that is why I'm joined by Lucy and Catherine today. So hello.
Hey.
Welcome. Thank you for coming along. I guess, how are you both going?
Good.
Yeah, good.
How are you?
I'm not too bad. Yeah, riding the waves, but well. Where are you both joining me from?
I'm in Headspace Bentley.
Yeah.
So the nice, lovely blue wall and green chairs.
Great choice.
Yeah.
And I'm at Headspace Frankston, which I've made an effort not to look like I'm sitting in a garage. So
You've done well.
thank you.
There's always a pop of colour in every room, isn't there, in Headspace?
Yeah, there is.
So it's always fun to ask people at the start, like, what's the worst self-care tip you've ever been given?
Who wants to go first? Lucy?
You go.
You want me to go? What's the worst self-care tip I've been given? I think a lot of self-care comes from, like, when people offer the advice, it's coming from a good place. And I think the one thing I've probably learned from people offering self-care tips, it's, I guess, from what they've learned in their own journey, and the application might be a bit harder than what's been said. Yeah. But some of the ones that I think have been quite interesting to hear are good vibes only is the one that I sort of get a bit that one. And and the other one is a rejection is a misdirection. And I think and I think those two, especially in the context of, I guess, the conversation we might be talking about, really, I think, is quite a hard one to sit with. It's quite a dismissive one to sit with, because as easy as they are to say, I think the application of going and placing your hopes in something that you were expecting to get and going, well, I got rejected from that, so it's just a redirection in life. Yeah. Is a bit, those are.
Disappointment is one of the hardest things to sit with, isn't it? So
and rejection as well. You know, how, in that moment, how can you look at it as a redirection? You're like, I wanted this, so no, it's not a redirection, it's a missed opportunity, you know. Absolutely. For some people.
Absolutely. And I think that would make us not very three-dimensional if we're only good vibes, would it? Like,
good vibes only, people. Really good vibes only.
Yeah.
Don't sweat the small stuff. That's another one.
Yeah. Very, very not helpful things people have said there.
Yeah.
What about you, Lise?
Yeah, I think the worst self-care tips are always the ones that we never ask for, but they somehow get given to us anyway. I think one that stands out for me is probably like to work harder, like to make more money as a way of looking after yourself. I feel like we have this idea, like this unconscious belief that making more money and being more like financially successful is part of self-care. But, you know, I've had parts of my life where I just set out to make a lot of money and that didn't work at all. So,
yeah.
Anyway. And then there was another one, just your classic mum advice. Once I asked mum for some self-care advice around stray dogs in foreign countries because I was pretty sure I was going to get bitten by a stray dog. In hindsight, I should have Googled it, but I messaged Mum, like, Mum, have you got any advice around stray dogs? And she just replied, be careful. So, yeah, shocking.
Just
the worst
a nice bit of blanket advice there. Great.
Thanks, Mum. Love you, Mum.
And I think we've chatted about this before, Lucy. You did say, I've never asked for one. And so often, like hearing what both are saying, often there's helpful things people to say to fill a silence or fill a space, but it's often not helpful. So
or it's often come from that person's uncomfortability to fill that silence. And it's like, you know, someone might offer or say something that's gotten them really down, and you know, or they're just struggling and they're wanting a listening ear, and the other person is struggling to sort of hear that information, and so they're like, oh, don't worry about it, things will get better, you know. In 5 years time you're going to look back on this and just be like, oh, what was I worried about? But there in that moment for that other person, it's a huge thing for them. Yeah.
I like when you say in 5 years time, you're like, let's talk about it in 5 years time when I have moved through that space. Like,
yeah, exactly.
This moment is not the one. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think it'd be really good to get a bit more context. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about both kind of, you know, your perspective you're bringing today. So kind of the work you do or your experience that you have.
Lucy?
You're so polite.
Thank you. Okay, so today I'm talking from my lived experience of having a psychotic episode about 4 or 5 years ago. Who knows? Back in the day. So I think it came about for many reasons, but when I look back, I think one of the biggest reasons why it came about is that I didn't have really good self-care strategies in place, or I didn't really have good coping mechanisms because, you know, I think when we're at school, we don't really ever get taught how to cope when a family member dies, or like you don't have a self-care class in high school or anything like that. So it's sort of things you have to learn maybe in hindsight, or it's a trial and error thing. So when I look back to that time in my life, if I had have interviewed myself back then, I would have been like, of course I'm looking after myself. What are you talking about? Like, party is the essence of life. It is looking after myself because I'm celebrating life. Like, that is self-care. But now I'm kind of looking at that like, probably didn't work. But I think it's only something I can say in hindsight because, you know, maybe in 10 years, I'll ask myself, like a former self, like, are you taking care of yourself now? And right now I'm doing meditation. I'm like, my future self could be like, what the hell? I was meditating like 10 years ago. That's absolutely insane. So yeah, maybe those things worked for me at the time, but in hindsight, they probably didn't.
Yeah. So I'm based within the Headspace Youth Early Psychosis program, and I coordinate the vocational program. So it's anyone that is looking to find purpose in their life and what that purpose looks like for them. I guess from my own lived experience in terms of my own career, I struggled a lot finding my own career and how to navigate that, and how I went about, you know, finding something that society and family and friends and ourselves, we put so much pressure on to find a job and to find something that you're good at, and how you look after yourself in, the times where, you don't know where you're going to go in life when it comes to finding or building purpose in a meaningful way and sustainable way for your career.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting, but both of you are saying there's different phases to our journey always. At one point we think this is the right way to do that, and then another point we go, no, this is a better way to do that. Or this
one. And I think often people see their growth or their journey in a linear perspective. So they're going, I'm going to go from point A to point B, and if I do this, it means I'm going to get this. But the reality is, especially when I talk about, careers and that sort of stuff, it's more like a jungle gym rather than a ladder. You're going to go to the side, you're going to go up a slide, you're going to come down it, you're going to go across to, a seesaw, then you're going to do this and that and whatever. And you'll eventually get to your destination, but it's not going to be in the way that we always thought it was going to be in the way. And how you cope and what tools you use to get through those dips and those highs of those sorts of things is, I think, probably more important than the destination itself.
Right. And on that then, Catherine, like, I think it's language, we do throw it around a lot, like vocational.
What does that mean?
What does that mean, like, in terms of how do we take care of ourselves vocationally? What would you actually expand vocational to mean for people? Like,
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, when someone says to you, what do you want to do when you leave school, or what are your next steps, or what are your next plans, or what are you going to study? Often people just refer as, what's your job going to be? And to someone that doesn't know, or to someone who hasn't sort of found a bit of a pathway in their career or their life's purpose, how can they answer that? So vocationally, how would you describe that? It's whatever is meaningful for you, and what that looks like. So whether it's a values-based thing, whether it's a money-based thing, whether it is a status-based thing, whether it is a need to feel, heard or accepted, if those values are true to where you are in your life and your career aligns with that, that's what I say, finding purpose. Yeah. So people might come in and go, I have no idea what I want to do in my life, but I want to make X amount of dollars a week, or I want to just do my job. I don't care about the responsibilities. I just need routine. And for them in that moment, that's purpose. That's not, anything different than someone coming to me going, hey, I really want to be a florist or a doctor or, whatever.
Yeah.
Because equally the reasoning behind it and the motion behind it and the motives behind it can be driven by some of the same needs and wants at the core of it. And that's what I say by meaning purpose.
All right. So just a classic situation of technical difficulty there. So we've flipped sides, but we're back. And I was just thinking before on what you were saying, and Catherine and Lucy, like Lucy, you were talking about maybe at school there are wellbeing programs in schools, but sometimes they don't really hit on the things that kind of hit home about how we should take care of ourselves, I guess. And I just see it's a curious link between, in schools you're often always talking about, what do you want to do vocationally? What do you want your future to look like? And there's something that's quite important about combining those in what you're saying, Catherine. You're saying, like, there's no point in picking something if it doesn't have value or purpose or meaning to you.
Yeah. Often, or if you've got something to prove, often people go into industries because, there's a lot of parental pressure. There is a lot of, especially, outdated career advice that's out there. I think career advice in Melbourne is quite young, and it's often left too late. And so a lot of young people are then at year 10 or year 11, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what am I going to do, and how am I going to get the marks to get into this course? And then all of a sudden there's this competition to then perform, when if you've been struggling with anything in your life, yet alone mental ill health, how do you then do that to to please your parents, or if there's pressure from the school that you attend to perform and get good grades, and everyone places so much on that ATAR at the end of it. And if you're someone that has low confidence, low self-esteem, low self-worth, and you're like, if I got into law and then I'm a lawyer, I'm going to, be more accepted in the community. And that, so people drive their careers based on how they feel about themselves, or if it's going to make them see themselves in a different light. So how do you look after yourself first and foremost in that? Is it about, okay, what are my value system? What are my belief system? Who am I as a person? What are my likes and dislikes? If I recognize, or if I do have the support around me, what is it that makes me me? And often that's the best starting place for someone to start thinking about where they want to go and what their next steps are. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean study.
And what you're saying there is probably just really important things for our mental health anyway, the idea of knowing what gives you purpose, knowing what makes you feel content in your life, and driving towards that. So do you think add any more about then what does that look like in terms of self-care, in terms of making that happen, I suppose? Does that?
Yeah, like I guess, for me personally, when I've looked at my own career, or I've looked at the next steps in taking decisions towards my next move, I always think, okay, do I have capacity right now to make an informed decision? Yes or no? Yes, great, let's start researching it. And I only do as much as I can to the capacity that I can hold. And then if I can't do it anymore, I leave it. I don't bother picking it up again, because there's no point, because I know I'm just going to place a lot of pressure on myself unnecessarily to try and create an answer that I think I want to know, but I don't necessarily have, the way of going about it. So I guess, I would encourage people to sort of test their limits in terms of how much they can tolerate, and then back off the second that it feels uncomfortable, and know that it's okay to leave it if it's too hard to deal with. And if that pressure around, okay, I need to find a course right now, what are my options? Is there a pathway in going? Do I have to go to university next year? Is there a TAFE course? Is there a pathway? Have like contingency plans in place to some degree, and then go, can I only afford to look after myself and add routine and structure for this week and this week only? And if I can do that, great.
Yeah.
When it comes...
Sorry.
I was just going to say, when it comes to things like looking for work, in these times when finding work is such a struggle and there's not many vacancies out there, it's okay. I'm going to see maybe 1 hour 1 week, or 2 hours a week, or whatever time limit you want to put on, and go, okay, I'm going to look for this, and if it fits in line, great. And then I'm going to do something for me, whether it's Netflix, whether it's, I'm going to go to the shops, or a walk, or whatever self-care tip that works for that person, I would then recommend. But little by little.
And I'm hearing you say that I think there's boundaries and structures and routines around that self-care in a vocational sense. But the one thing which it might lead a little bit to Lucy, your experience is the why you're doing those things, or taking the actions which feel like self-care. And I guess I wanted to throw to you a bit, Lucy, around like what's for you, what's unique or about your perspective in self-care, like the why of it, I guess.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I became so involved in self-care and well-being in general is because I have a motivation not to ever end back up in a psych ward again. So that's kind of incentive for me to continue the things that make me feel good and continue my own self-well-being and, yeah, general self-care. So I think when I first came out of the psych ward, like my case manager was sort of like, you take your medication, go for a walk. Like everyone had their own little self-care tips for me to do. And they were like a goal I had, but they were it was a chore I had to do. It's kind of like, I don't feel like going for a run, but I know I have to do it. So little by little, I realized why I had these things in place and why it was important to get sleep and not be up all night, things like that. So now, like a few years on, I can see that it's become like embedded into my life rather than a task. Like like the benefits are too good to see it as a chore. Like it's just there now.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So at the time when, your case managers are saying to you, go for a walk or, work on your sleep and that sort of stuff, and you thought it was a chore, did you push back or fight back and be like, why are you telling me this and who do you think you are?
No.
I don't mean it so offensively.
My case manager, I work with him now. But it was just sort of like the general, I could tell like it was a general thing that maybe case managers say to patients or clients, whatever you want to call them. And I don't know. It's really hard to answer that question. I don't think I ever was like, no, I'm not going to do it. But I took on what he said, but I did it in my own way, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't just like
it's when we talked about it, so I was just thinking on that point, like you talked a little bit like, chores can become habits and they can you can, I guess for me sometimes self-care feels like just throwing a lot of stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. And so it's like often in times it can be we get a lot of ideas about what to do and they can feel like chores or things or tasks, like you said, lose to do them, but then they do some will slip away and some, like you say, have become embedded as a really good part of your life, like a great part of your routine.
And I think what's another really important aspect is to know that you're going to have the ups and downs of finding what self-care works for you, and some are going to work really well and some are going to work miserably for you. Well, for myself anyway, that's how I found it. When I heard people be like, like for instance, Lucy, you're saying meditation, and I tried it and I was like, oh man, this does not work for me at all. And I was like, oh, what's the hype about? And I felt like I was, those monkeys with the symbols that run around. So I felt like my mind I was like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't cut out for me yet.
Yeah, I mean, like, I like meditation, but I can't get into yoga. Like yoga has the exact opposite benefit of what it should have. Like I start judging myself when I do yoga, but you'd think meditation and yoga are quite linked and they'd sit in the same degree. I love meditation, but yoga, I just can't get into it. It's only a slight variance. It's moving meditation, but that one variance just doesn't work for me yet.
Yeah.
I feel like it's an interesting idea of maybe on that, when you do get all those ideas about what self-care could look like, it feels a bit like a task list and you try a few and do things. And maybe in listening to what you're saying, it's like sometimes it's good to lean in to ourselves. We know that there's a lot of learning in that, but sometimes it's good to have self-care that just nourishes you and actually feels like it supports your moment every day to day, I guess, rather than feeling like a to-do list, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering then, throwing the word around self-care, does that language even work, that phrase work for both of you, or would you have a different way of thinking about the language around that? Would you even use it in your life, I guess? I've made you say it a lot in this chat. Would you?
Good question. In a work setting, I don't think I generally use that term. I think when I have the privilege to work with young people, often I use the word purpose and meaningful. And I think that probably isn't aligned with self-care, because when you do it with, when you look for work or look for study or look for, a career with purpose and with meaning, if that's what you're after, there has to be elements of self-care that comes along with that. So I probably don't use that term in my work setting. In my personal settings, like when no, I just do what I want to do.
Just take care.
Is that self-care or selfishness?
That's what you need.
Yeah.
And you, Lise, would you use it as a phrase, or how does it sit?
I do use it just because I think it's a word that it's quite self-explanatory. Like, it doesn't often get misconstrued. If you use it, people generally know what you're talking about. However, I think we've used it to the point where it's become a buzzword and it's lost a lot of its meaning. And I think, like, advertising companies have really grasped onto that and sort of taken advantage of the whole self-care idea. And the other day I was watching an ad and they were marketing packet dye for your hair, and the person who was selling it to them was just sort of like selling the concept that if you were dyeing your hair, if you were putting chemicals in your hair, then you were practicing self-care, and if you've practiced self-care, then you've got self-worth. I was just kind of like, if you're gonna market it that way, then anything can be called self-care. Like, it's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. And I think with the term self-care as well, depending how you view it, there's a massive element of privilege that comes along with that. And, you look at systemic or generational indifferences and marginalized communities where self-care might not be available in the way that we think of it. How do we then promote, purpose and meaning and looking after yourself when you've had historical, systemic oppression or, that sort of stuff. So I think sometimes the word and the language used around it needs to encompass a broader way of accepting certain privileges that we naturally, that people are in. But yeah.
And the idea of taking care of yourself, but also taking care of others, they can be very intertwined in people's experiences, can't it? So it might be like you say, the idea of asking, what's the purpose of this? That was really lovely to chat about all of those different ideas with you.
You're welcome. It's been good.
Yeah. Just let everyone know that we do these chats weekly. So if you want to see more, they'll be on the YouTube, and there's also some on our Instagram and Facebook, so you can check there. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and take care.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.